largest urban community land trusts in the United States. And then also going macro, I'm also on the board of the International Center for Community Land Trusts, which was started by John Davis and other CLT practitioners, and it now includes members from all over the world who are trying to uplift the CLT model and share information. So I have both the, so I'm going to do mostly focus on Dudley Street and then do a little plug at the end for the International Center. Just wanted to start a little bit about myself. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I've been a community organizer for, we'll say, 25 plus years. And I came into the land trust movement through Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, where I was the director of sustainable economic development. And when I got hired, the director of the land trust was leaving, and the executive director said, "Oh, by the way, you're also going to be director of the land trust." And I said, "Great." And I went home and told my wife, and she said, "Do you get 2 salaries for that?" And I said, "No, I didn't negotiate that very well." So for about 3 years, I was running both the organizing side of things at Dudley Street and also running the land trust until I was able to find somebody to take over the running of the land trust. And I say that because I don't come from this from a housing real estate point of view. I learned the hard way about development projects, and but I come at this more from the organizing side of things, and have really been most interested in my consulting work with emerging community land trusts and groups who are really interested in making sure that we're keeping the C and the CLT, that organizing and governance are really at the forefront of what we do. So that's what I'm going to give a little background on DS&I and jump right in. So hello. Okay, so Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. We're located in the city of Boston, in the neighborhoods of Roxbury and North Dorchester, which are, you can see, right in the heart of Boston, only about 2 miles from downtown Boston. And that's very important because, you know, I'm sure you know the history of housing discrimination and redlining, and Boston has faced that, is one of the most segregated cities in the United States. So Roxbury and Dorchester was for a long time where black families were allowed to live and get mortgages and rent. And if they tried to go outside of those neighborhoods, they would be denied mortgages and discriminated against by realtors and real estate companies, et cetera. So, but then in the late 70s, because Dorchester and Roxbury are so close to downtown, developers decided this was going to be the new hot place to be, and that they started buying up properties, buying up land, and putting a real threat to the future of the Roxbury community. Back then, in the early 80s, 1980s, this is what Dudley Street looked like. There were over 1,300 vacant lots, 20% of the land in the Dudley community, illegal dumping sites, huge brownfield sites. Partly that happened because the same investors who came in, who purchased the properties in the 70s, it turned out Dudley wasn't ready to be for the speculation that they thought, so they burned down their properties, and arson for profit became the watchword for several years. And hundreds of properties were just torched for the insurance money. The owners would just walk away, and so the neighbors were just left dealing with that. And I'm going to show you a short clip at the end that'll show you some of the original, organizing but just what it was like to be there during that time. So this is just an example of some of the early efforts that residents made before the founding of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, just to start trying to clean up vacant lots. This was the epicenter for the whole city of stolen cars being dumped, of illegal contracting. Instead of paying to have your contracting material disposed of, they would just come and dump it at illegal trash transfer stations in the Dudley neighborhood. There were about 20 illegal dumps in the neighborhood that the city didn't didn't deal with, didn't regulate, didn't try to shut down, et cetera. This is a scene. These are two little girls walking home from the Mason School. So this is pretty typical of, these are vacant lots that have been allowed to be overgrown, and streets that weren't in repair, and so just a really difficult situation for the residents who were trying to stay in the community, and so this was. People started to organize. Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was formed in 1984 specifically to fight the dumping, the illegal dumping that was happening. And that was the number one issue when people started door knocking, was what are we going to do about all these trash stations? What are we going to do about stolen cars and all the other things that were being dumped? This was, the groups decided to focus on a 62-acre area of Roxbury that they called the Dudley Triangle. And the reason they did that is because this is where you see the black squares and shapes. Those were all abandoned or blighted properties. So more than half of that part of the neighborhood was either privately owned, where someone had just walked away from their properties, and now it might be owned by 3 different people, and an LLC and a trust, and nobody knew who the owners were, and so it was hard to get them to maintain it. And the other half were owned by the city, who had taken them in tax foreclosure when owners had walked away. So this was the scenario of in the mid-'80s. So into that breach steps Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which set itself up as a group that was really first and foremost set up to organize, plan for, create, and control. Those are when we started working at DSNI, everyone had to memorize the mission statement, and we'd be quizzed at any time about what the mission statement was, because it wasn't just organizing, it wasn't just being creative, it was about community control. In the early days, it was about doing anything we could to take on the illegal dumping. So every idea that people had was thrown out there, and that included direct action against some of the illegal dumps. That included more creative activities. So for example, the mayor of Boston at the time was running for re-election, and there were over 100 cars, stolen cars, abandoned cars, all around Dudley Street. And after months and months of trying to get them to do something about it, some enterprising volunteer went down to his campaign office and took 300 bumper stickers and put them all over saying, "Vote for Ray Flynn for mayor," all over the stolen and abandoned cars. And within hours, Department of Public Works was down towing cars out of there. So like, it was, back in those days, it was like, just throw everything up against the wall. We are under siege. Let's just do whatever we can. And that, all of that led to the Don't Dump on Us campaign. So that was the first real campaign, really targeting the illegal trash transfer stations, and really targeting illegal contractors who were unlicensed and dumping things, et cetera. And so we started to get a little momentum. And in the end, fast forward a couple of years, we were able to get the trash transfer stations locked up. And 6 of the 20 were shut down by the city. The rest started to kind of fade away just because the spotlight was now on that part of the neighborhood, and it was no longer allowed to be a dumping ground. The founders of DSNI were very wise in that they decided we can't just keep organizing to stop things. We can't just stop dumping. We can't just say no, 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 because something else, remember, we're 2 miles away from downtown. So if it's not illegal dumping and disinvestment, it's going to be gentrification and displacement. So they took the lead and created the Take a Stand, Own the Land campaign. And that was an idea of trying to be more proactive about development, not just organizing to stop, but really taking the lead to take ownership of the land. And the idea was that they didn't want to be, and this might be familiar to a lot of you, they didn't want to just be organizing against big developers and say, hey, can we have 10% of that be affordable, please? Or that's a little too dense, can we do this? they said, we want to own the land. And one of the founders said, you know, we're sick of having a seat at the table. All we do is fight for a seat at the table. What if we own the table? And so that was the rallying cry for the beginnings of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. And so the neighborhood, DS&I created the land trust as a vehicle for its economic development and affordable housing strategies. And first and foremost, these two principles of development without displacement and generating community and family assets and wealth. So trying to balance out the control that the community needs and to maintain homes as permanently affordable while also giving families a chance to build wealth and to try to close the wealth gap that is a huge issue in the United States and everywhere. But setting it up was not just setting up the land trust, but also coming up with standards for community development, not just on the land trust, but also for private development. Organizing with the city to have a memorandum of understanding where developers would have to come to DS&I to present their proposals if they needed zoning relief. And that gave us a chance to put our own standards into practice and say, well, if you don't want to do that, we'll just go to the zoning hearing and fight it out. And sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but it became pretty clear that development was going to be done differently in the community. And you'll see when in the brief film, the city also had a master plan at the time that they were proposing that had very little community input, that mostly focused on hotels and condominium conversion of the 3-family homes in the neighborhood. And so DS&I, through the Take a Stand, Own the Land campaign, essentially tore up the city's master plan and came up with our own. And that was the beginning of the real kind of power of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative example, and led to DS&I being granted eminent domain authority, which was by the city of Boston, on those vacant lots in the Dudley Triangle. So not on occupied homes, because the neighborhood had been through eminent domain where the city would, you know, urban renew people out of their homes. And so DS&I didn't want any part of that. But they did take on the 30 acres of vacant lots that the city could not do anything with, that nobody was able to do anything with. And it gave, for the first and only time that we've heard of in the country, DS&I got, a nonprofit got eminent domain authority, which allowed us to go to the owners of those properties and say, hey, I know you own this land. Here's a check. We think it's going to be worth $30,000. And here it is. Take it or leave it, because you've been doing nothing for 20 years. And it created a huge shockwave through the development community and through Boston. We were lucky to have very good pro bono real estate lawyers, and we did have to go to court several times when people said, this is totally illegal, and the lawyers would say, no, actually it's totally legal, and this is what we're doing. And so it was kind of a carrot and stick approach. Once we used it a few times, it became pretty clear it was better to make a deal with us, and so people did get paid for their land. We got a Ford Foundation program-related loan that of $2 million that we used to start paying for the land. But slowly, the land trust acquired these properties over time, and the city was so happy that, after being very unhappy for a long time, was so happy that we were actually moving things forward that they donated the other 15 acres for like $100 a parcel, very small amounts. So I know I don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to fast forward from 1984 to today. Everything in colored here is are parcels that are owned by the Dudley Neighbors Inc. Community Land Trust. So the Dudley Neighbors Inc. Community Land Trust now owns 32 of the 62 acres in the Dudley Triangle. Almost every parcel has been developed into something based on the community's vision. And this is a really important part. The goal of DS&I was not just about affordable housing or stopping displacement. That was a key rallying cry. But the real idea was to build an urban village, to organize and to plan and to talk about what did people really want to see in their neighborhood, and why couldn't low-income families who had fought so hard to make Dudley such a great neighborhood be able to stay and live in those communities? And why couldn't we have playgrounds and that were safe? Why couldn't we have parks? How about urban farming? The community of Dudley is a large immigrant community, families from Cape Verde, Latino families, black families who had come up from the South. A lot of tradition of farming in their background. And so people wanted yards where they could put raised bed gardens. They wanted to have access to community gardens and farms. So if you look at what's on the land trust today, it's over 225 units of affordable housing, including home ownership. But there's also 10,000 square foot community greenhouse. There's 2 acres of community farms with gardens as well. There's also some commercial space, which I'll talk about in a second, and a playground. And one thing that the land trust does, the land trust owns the land, but we don't do the farming. The land trust finds groups. That's one of my key messages, is we try to do what we do well, which is steward the land and organize. But then we found groups like the Urban Farming Institute or the Food Project to run the greenhouse and run the farms. I've seen a lot of land trusts get in trouble when they're like, oh, we do housing, how hard can a farm be? No problem. And then it's a mess, everyone hates them, that nothing's happening, and it really hurts their reputation. So really, like, how do you stay in your lane? How do you really make sure that you're focusing on what you're good at? The families who are owners in the neighborhood we did a survey recently, and 50% of the families who are in the homes have been there, are earning less than $40,000 a year. Most of them who moved in have been there for 20 plus years in the original developments. It isn't a place where they're moving out of. They, partly because the market in Boston is crazy, but also partly because it's become their community and their home, and they're able to save money and invest in their child's education, in their own education, and so housing has been decommodified to the point where they want to stay and keep building the community, which I think is important when you think about resale formulas and how does, the land trust model is very flexible. If there are some land trusts that want to do more like starter homes, and maybe you get more of your investment in the first few years, and then it kind of levels off. So the idea is, like, you got this house for 5 years. After that, it's kind of incentivizing you to sell so another family can move in. In the Boston context, in most cities that I work in the United States, there's no affordable market housing. And so the DS&I model is to slowly reward people with more equity the longer they stay there. So after 10 years, there's a bump in your equity, and you also get credit for improvements that you've made. So that's just the way that the DS&I community decided to do it. Other communities have do it differently, but that's one of the beauties of the land trust model. These are just a few shots of original back in the 80s land trust home. The picture I showed you of the cleanup from the late 80s. This is now one of the most beautiful parks in the neighborhood. This is a water feature in the summer of the Star here, and surrounded by affordable homes that are on the land trust. The little girls walking on the street home from school. This is the same picture, same street. That's the other side of the park. All of the housing you can see, except a couple in the distance, are on the land trust, either as cooperative housing or home ownership housing. So again, DS&I chose to focus on a very specific geographic area, in part because they knew the impact that they could have. And for any of you who have been to DS&I and done the tour, you can do a walking tour, and in the span of a half mile, you can see the farm, you can see the greenhouse, you can see the parks. And so again, there's not a right or wrong way to do it. This was just the way that the community felt like this was the better way to do it, rather than like pick one building there and one building there, and et cetera. So fast forward to today. Now, that was back in the day when there was 30 acres of land available, right? not many acres of land available in our communities anymore, right? It's not, you can't just come in and say, hey, city, you have that 15 acres now, we want to get it. So we've had to deal with the same issues that other land trusts and other community groups have of how do you compete in the private market, how do you get creative about partnering on things, but tried to stay true to the principles of the urban village. So these are current projects that include housing and mixed use on community space, new affordable home ownerships, community garden beds being run by a group called the Food Project. And the biggest project is called Columbia Crossing, which was the private purchase of an old bank building that in the middle of Upham's Corner, which has been rebranded by the city as the Arts and Innovation District because there's a 100-year-old theater there, there's other arts communities there. So DS&I has decided to make this a priority for artist housing and first floor artist commercial economic, artistic, creative economic development space. So this is what it may look like. It's not, doesn't look like that yet, but there are, but the point is that they've had to get a lot more creative because they haven't been able to just get land for $1 anymore. And that's meant, that has meant cooperating with or looking for collaborations with private developers. That's meant getting more creative with how you're raising money to access the land. This is the last parcel in the Dudley Triangle that has not been developed yet. It's been, we did a big public art project. It's now called Artiera Livre, which is a combination of English, Spanish, and Cape Verdean Creole that was created by a local artist. And that's going to be commercial space because it's right on the main fare of Dudley Street. And, I end with this one, and you can see our greenhouses in the background. So they want to create commercial space that's tied in somehow to the food economy in the neighborhood. I end the DS&I part with this slide just because it brings us back to the power of the Community Land Trust as a vehicle, not as an end in itself, but as a vehicle to carry out your organizing and economic development agenda. And that in my old days when I was working with the National CLT Network in the United States, we used to do workshops called Keeping the C in the CLT. And that's the overarching vision of DS&I. We don't always get it right, and I'm sorry I missed the session last night at the bar talking about the mistakes that have been made and what we learned, but we've certainly learned a lot of mistakes. I'm happy to talk about them. But the other things we've done that is really look at the land trust as a vehicle, not as the only strategy. So in addition to the 250 homes on the land trust, another 600 plus homes, affordable homes, have been created through our work on the Sustainable Development Committee, holding private developers accountable for creating more affordable housing in the neighborhood. Not on the land trust, but we're claiming those as wins, right? Like that has had an impact on how development happens in the community. We've also created development standards that developers know they have to come in and at least take seriously. So for example, 40% of the community is below the age of 18. So one of the big priorities of the Sustainable Development Committee was bedroom sizes. And developers are coming in with these micro units. They're like, oh, yeah, this is a 3-bedroom, and this is about a, 4x6 room. You're like, what are you doing? This is a bedroom? And so we came up with standards that said every bedroom has to be big enough for a child to have a bed, a bureau, and a desk. You do the math on what that figures out, but we need you to come back with little drawings of what that's going to look like. And at first, the developers were like, that's illegal. You can't make us do that. And we're like, yeah, no, we can't. And but we could keep the organizing spirit to then go to zoning and say, you know what? How would you guys on the zoning board like to have your kids living in a closet? And we would win more than we would lose. And now it's kind of accepted, like, oh, we're going to Dudley. We got to make those bedrooms bigger. And that's just kind of an important organizing feature, not related to the land trust at all, in a sense. But the land trust also, when they go to build, has to meet Dudley standards because we don't want to be, accused of being hypocrites. So that has improved the development environment all around. And finally, the other piece that DSNI has been very involved in over the last few years is the formation of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, which has included providing technical assistance to now 8 CLTs and growing in the Boston area. Because it used to be like Dudley was like, oh, you're a special case, we'll just work with you, but don't tell the other neighborhoods. And it just became more and more ridiculous to have like different zoning, different development standards for different neighborhoods. So now we've worked with neighborhoods throughout Boston and in the greater Boston area to try to spread this model. And so that's a really exciting piece of our work. And now going a little bit, now from the very micro to macro, this is just, CLTs are having their moment in the United States. They're 10 years ago, people were like, community land trust, what? Now, this is just a smorgasbord of clips of headlines from Philadelphia to Buffalo to Chicago to Georgia to New York, just talking about what the land trust model has meant to, is meaning to groups that have been involved in community organizing against displacement. And the tool that they have now in their toolkit is growing, and DSNI has been really happy to have made mistakes in the beginning and also shared our learnings about what it, how do you keep true to the community vision and community spirit and as you move forward. So I've left DSNI. I'm now an independent consultant. I work with DSNI and a lot of other emerging land trusts. I work a lot with the groups that are started out as organizing against displacement, and then they were like, why don't we own this stuff? Why do, so that's my sweet spot as opposed to some of the like bigger top-down CLTs. But it's led me to join the board of the International Center for Community Land Trusts. I don't know if who knows John Davis, if he's been to present, but this is his brainchild with a lot of other people who are working around the country. And John literally wrote a book called the Community Land Trust Handbook, and out at the table there's copies of books and articles that have been written by the center. The center is really set up to promote education, technical assistance, and connection among land trusts or groups that may not call themselves land trusts but are organizing for land justice around the world. So that includes the Caño Martín Peña CLT in Puerto Rico. That includes the catalytic communities in Brazil, which are working in the favelas. That includes numerous land trusts in Europe, includes the Canadian CLT network. And in one of the books, Josh and Susan have a chapter about the formation of CLTs in Canada. So this was an attempt to bring together CLTs from around the world and in a sharing, in a way to share, not just to be like, this is how you do it, but like what is really going on in communities and how can the International CLT Network Center promote that. One of the ways that we do that is by promoting World CLT Day, which is an effort to promote and market the CLT concept around the world. The next CLT Day is going to be May 16th and 17th, 2025. That includes, it's a 2-day thing given the time of the world, right? So it goes over 2 days. But one of the very basic things is land trusts from all around the world took pictures and put them up on social media as World CLT Day. And, but at the same time, they did more serious things like workshops and trainings on the experience in the Global South. So they had webinars with Caño Martín Peña and the groups in Brazil doing trilingual Zoom meetings about it, and that were really well attended. So it's really, it's a new group, but it's growing, and you'll see out on the table, there's a couple of, there's a bunch of publications that the center has created. Community Land Trust Applications in Urban Neighborhoods, which has a story of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, also the article by Josh and Susan. impactful development and community empowerment, balancing the dual goals of a global CLT movement. This is something that comes up a lot. There's articles by practitioners who are grappling with those same issues. So I want to do a little plug for their library, and then they also have a treasure trove of online resources that are there. So I know they're going to be some of the books are going to be raffled off, but I put on some of your chairs the information about the center, and there's more information out on the tables. So I want to bring it all the way back before we open it to questions. I want to bring it back to a short clip from a film called Holding Ground, which is the origin story of DSNI. It's about an hour long. This is about an 8 or 9 minute clip. And it brings it back to how DSNI got started. It tells the story much better and more clearly than I could. And it takes you from 1984 to about 1994 when the first land trust home was built. And it follows the saying that they have at DSNI, which is, every brilliant idea that we have takes about 10 years to get to develop. So, just to encourage you to stay with it, to not give up, that it can go slowly and then all of a sudden things pop. So I want to just show a short clip here and then open it up for questions.
When I first moved to this neighborhood, the neighborhood had a lot of garbage, a lot of trash, a lot of vacant lots. It was like a no man's land.
Everyone was moving out, and people that were moving in saying, oh, this is a ghetto.
More and more houses were being abandoned. And then a number of the owners of those buildings decided that one of the ways that they could get their money back and maybe even make a quick profit was to burn their houses down.
Every night there was a fire. It was like this block, the next block, the block after that. And each time they'd burn a house, they'd tear it down. You had another vacant lot, so I saw the vacant lots increase. I saw the amount of crap on the vacant lots increase, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
Preceding the first community meeting, there was literally months of work that went into the planning for it. What we wanted to do was to think about how we could refocus our grant making. What could we do, even as a small foundation, what could we do that might attract other larger foundations to help out, to see what we can do in the Roxbury area. That probably is the neediest area in the city.
I asked them, I said, well, how many of you live in this neighborhood? And nobody raised their hand.
My initial impression of Che was that she was an agitator. She was either sent in or voluntarily went in to disrupt the meeting.
You always have people from downtown or somewhere else coming and telling you what you need in your neighborhood.
The fact was that we had made a mistake. We just had misjudged and really not thought through how we could put a neighborhood initiative together without including the residents. It was a rather incredible mistake.
In a series of small meetings, we were able to redo the governance structure in order to make sure that residents were included, and residents were the majority on this new board of directors.
We decided the board members would be elected by the community every 2 years. Each ethnic group would have 3 seats, and the rest of the seats would be for local housing and human service organizations, local businesses, and religious institutions. We kept the name Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, or DSNI, and agreed we'd work together to revitalize the whole community.
We wanted to come up with some short-term organizing campaigns for folks to start to see that they do in fact have some power and can have some victories.
We're in a neighborhood doing a survey on neighborhood conditions.
As we did a lot of the door knocking, what we found was that the vacant lots were just about the #1 issue that people kept bringing up.
There was unscrupulous contractors from throughout the city, from throughout the greater Boston area, would come and dump their garbage on these lots.
You had to hold your nose when you drove down the street. I mean, it was terrible. No human being should have to live in that kind of situation.
The dumping affected everyone who lived here, but we came from different cultures and spoke different languages, and it was hard to communicate and work together. So we had to find different ways to get all the groups involved.
Produção e apresentação de Jorge Fidalgo e Adalberto Teixeira. Renovação de...
As I started working for the SNI as a community organizer, I used the Cape Verdean radio show as a tool to educate people about what was happening with the SNI and what the SNI was about. We organized the community to go to City Hall, to go to state agencies and demand services.
1 month after pledging to help us clean up the lots, many of which were in fact owned by the city provided equipment for neighborhood cleanup.
We are cleaning because this is Roxbury, and Roxbury is going to be fucking clean. It's going to be clean. Not only this lot, the whole neighborhood, because we take pride in it.
They picked this community to do their illegal dumping. Why do they do that? Do they think we can't fight back? I think this action demonstrates that we're going to fight back.
Officials estimate there are about 10 illegal transfer stations around the city. Tonight represents the first time that officials have ever tried to lock any up.
The day we were able to padlock those train stations, it was great. It was great. And to actually see us together try to do something and have it happen, this was like a symbol of hope. I mean, it's like you couldn't tell us that we weren't going to make, big changes. It was great.
We had drafted for Mayor Flynn, a concept plan for Roxbury around Dudley Square.
When you start hearing about other parts of the city, like the South End, where they were moving people of low income out and bringing in people of high income in, and you just figure it's going to happen here. They're trying to push us all out. It was very scary. It was very, very scary.
Ray Flynn resorted to acting toward the neighborhoods in a way that was very similar to the early urban renewal attempts.
Community leaders were infuriated by the failure of city and state officials to include residents in the planning process.
The fact that we have no specifications, nothing in print in front of us so that we can look at it and respond intelligently, I think is a slap in the face.
It really just sounded like a plot for gentrification. They're coming through the South End, they're gonna do Dudley Square, in just a few minutes, they're gonna go right down Dudley Street. I mean, we're only a hop, skip, and a jump from downtown. How many times are we gonna allow people to push us from one place to another in the city?
There's nothing like getting taken to the woodshed publicly for you to think clear out. Nothing does as much good for your thinking as that. And I spent the next 4 months going to the woodshed.
We wanted to improve this neighborhood on our own terms. So we hired urban planners who would look to us for solutions.
Our approach was really to listen and to sit down and say, describe for us the kinds of things that you're experiencing, and then we will begin to translate those in terms of strategies, issues, priorities.
Today we come together to celebrate a very unique plan that stresses services to rebuild the spirit of this community as well as to develop the neighborhood.
The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative Plan announced today will make some dreams here reality. The initiative report was 9 months in the planning by local residents. It focuses on developing the area with the use of $134 million in public funds.
Having the city adopt our plan really turned the tables on how development is done. That top-down effect was not happening. It was a bottom-up. We met together in the middle. And that's very, very significant because it's totally opposite to what they've always done.
While we were building partnerships to get the first homes built, we were also working to create other kinds of opportunities.
I really truly believe that if the youth in the community could become more involved in the community and become more involved with helping others, that they would give more value for life and respect for themselves. New Bend Roots started in 1990 with one person. Today we have a membership list of over 200 youths in the neighborhood.
As the Dudley community, we need to support the young people
nourish them and help them and cultivate them as if they were crops.
My name is Jason Webb. I'm 14 years old. I have devoted half of my life to the community.
There still are real questions as to, will people support this housing? Will people live here? We know what the answer is. Get the housing built, make it the right housing, which you know it will be, and people will move in and be very happy.
In 10 long years, but we have arrived. Give us your
Hi, my name is Ruby Grice, and I'm one of the first home buyers. Yeah, I moved out of the area a while back, and I'm happy to say that I'm coming back home. It's been a long process. It's a headache. I think I've gotten a couple of gray hairs, but thank God for coloring. I will use it. And thank you again.
Getting some free food. Get some of this cake.
Well, we moved off of this street in 1962. Oh, it feels good to come back home. It seems like this is home, whereas I started here when I first moved to Boston, and I know this will probably be where I end up at. It makes it feel like it was 37 years ago, everyone mingling and having a nice time.
I guess the biggest thing happened was when my 11-year-old said to me the night that we moved in that Saturday night, he says, "Mommy, I'm so proud of you." And I was like, I did it, you know, and that was my biggest reward was my son telling me that.
How do you develop confidence in a community, in individuals, to speak, to stand up for, to strive, to fight, and to have hope? I think those are the key challenges. It's not so much what building are you going to build or what social program are you going to change, but it's the people part of it, the part that has people investing themselves to make a difference, to make a change, and to see that hope. That's the challenge.
So I could have, someone suggested I just show the hour movie and I could have just shut up. But I did want to emphasize, you know, some of the folks who are in that film is from the late 90s, later became leaders of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Jason Webb, who had the quote about "I'm 14 years old and have dedicated my life," he's now a staff person at the Grounded Solutions Network after working for Dudley Street. John Barros, who was the youth who said he had Nubian roots, had over 200 youth. He later became executive director of DSNI and ran for mayor. Came in third and ended up as deputy mayor under a previous administration. So there's a lot of emphasis at DSNI about leadership development from the beginning and not losing that emphasis and putting resources into continually building leadership, working with young people and giving them the idea that they can run this organization because they do, like they're running it. And so that's just something we wanted to leave you with. I'm happy to take, I think we got 15 minutes to take some questions or comments, and yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, so we ask you, do you use the mic just so the online can hear as well?
Hi, I guess my main question is, with the affordable ownership, it sounds like you're using like price controls, like resale with a formula to do equity. Have you been able to move that program onto properties that you're now having to buy at the market, not getting the land for free, or is that something that you haven't been able to move? I will say, you hear a lot about how that program doesn't work in Canada. I'm a lawyer in the U.S. and Canada, and my best guess is because Canadians don't give the land for free the way that the U.S. does. So have you had success in moving ownership programs where you're not getting the land through an eminent domain program that sounds insane for
Yeah.
$1?
Yes, great question. We've had to get very creative. So one of the things that we do now with the city is a current project on Magnolia Street outside of the Triangle is that we organized with the city to get a cluster of, I think, 15 different vacant lots to do a home ownership program. The city was interested in more market rate home ownership, and we were not interested in that so much. And so we negotiated, and out of the 12, I don't know, 15 homes are being built, 5 of them are going to be market rate, not on the land trust. The other 10 are going to be for low and moderate income families, and they'll be on the land trust, and they're cross-subsidized by the market rate sale price. So the developer gets their money, but we also get the subsidy to make the remaining homes affordable. So we've had, maybe 20 years ago, we would have said, no, we want all 15, but that, we've had to make some compromises to get a larger stake. The other thing is the Greater Boston Land Trust Network and DSNI have advocated successfully to get an acquisition fund from the city, a dedicated fund that helps to write down the costs of buying on the private market, and is collaborating with larger community development finance institutions and the National Cooperative Bank to get lines of credit and lending pools that allow you to combine that with public subsidy and get the purchase price down. But it's not as straightforward as it used to be. It's really people are killing a lot of brain cells trying to figure out how to do it.
I commend you on an excellent presentation, particularly the video afterwards as well. You mentioned about development standards, or Dudley standards, I think you might have referred to it. Now, when development takes place, the standards under which the development happens are pretty much set. So I'm wondering if you could explain that just a bit further, because you also said something about negotiation. And so I was kind of curious in terms of what you were actually getting at.
Sure.
Either I saw it as standards or...
So it's both. So first off, they talked about ripping up the city's plan and coming up with our own plan. And that master plan for the neighborhood included a lot of development standards that then developed. So there's not as much negotiation because they know they have to do certain things. Unfortunately, in Boston, unlike a normal city, 90% of its projects have to go through zoning, have to get a zoning variance. So rather than have like a zoning code that everyone can live by and gets negotiated out, the mayor of Boston has always wanted to have power to make exceptions whenever they wanted, which has led to a complete chaos. But it has provided the opportunity for groups like DSNI to say, well, if there's no real standards here, then we're going to tell you, we want to see family housing here, not little studios. We want to see yard space. We want to see enough the bedroom sizes. So it's created the gray area where if the city's not going to stick to its zoning and everything's going to go to variances, that means a lot of that negotiation or organizing happens at the Zoning Board of Appeals. The current mayor is trying to make that more rational and has a plan for creating zoning that would actually be more logical and more predictable for developers. We're a little worried that that's going to cause community groups to not have as much say in it. So it's a balancing act but that's the space in which we were able to organize and negotiate. Yeah.
I just want to follow up. Do you still have eminent domain power? Was that like a limited time? I'm sorry, I'm a U.S. attorney, and I almost fell on my chair when you guys said that you got granted that.
So we had eminent domain authority over the Dudley Triangle parcels. and just about every one of those parcels is now in development or has been developed. But it didn't go away. Like if other lands become vacant, we would still have that authority. We have not used it for years now. We haven't had to use it for years. Most of it was used in the front end, but we like to pull it out every once in a while just to freak developers out, and they're like, "What? You have what?" And it's like, "Well, you're just saying, you know, if you." And we have very good real estate, downtown real estate, who have kind of attorneys who have kind of adopted DS&I. So they're like, "Bring it on, let's go, you know, let's go," and you know, and so, but you know, it's a very controversial topic and tactic. So we like to have it as the stick, but we try to use the carrot more. How do we get it? I mean, it was the reason. One of the reasons we got it was because the mayor who was shown there he had defeated Mel King, who was a community organizer, who was the first black man to be in the finals for mayor and made the finals. And then all the white candidates piled up against him and said, "Oh no, we're going with Ray Flynn," who was the candidate who ended up winning. But he was under a lot of pressure to deliver for the community. And so when we proposed eminent domain, he grabbed it, and but all his developer friends around him like lost their minds about it, and so no other group has been able to get that authority in Boston, and I don't think anywhere else that I know of. It's but I'm here to say too, you can do grassroots community land trust without eminent domain, as you all have shown, and how hundreds of groups in the U.S. It's a tool. Just eminent domain is a tool, and it's been a very useful tool, but so haven't the memorandums of understanding with the city about disposal of land and the development standards and other things. So we use all the tools we can find. That was just expropriation. Only vacant. So the rumors were that we were going to yank people out of their houses like the city had done. But once people found out, oh, it was this vacant land that I've lived next to for 20 years that's owned by some guy who lives 100 miles away, and then it was like, yeah, what can I do? Let's sign up. So we had to do a big educational campaign because you know, it was part of the urban removal program all through Boston using eminent domain. So we had to tread lightly there.
I'm actually quite happy to defer if there's other questions, but
go for it.
Okay, I guess just on the theme of the presentation and the title, in terms of development without displacement, I guess I'm wondering what kinds of principles there are within, like more specifically within the DSNI, about situations where you're either redeveloping or rehabilitating buildings, and how to prevent displacement of occupants.
No, that's a great question. You know, it's a nice slogan and we use it a lot. There's also the reality of if a large building is being renovated, or in Boston, in some of the neighborhoods, if public housing is being renovated and people get moved out temporarily, and 5 years later, only 20% of them come back. And so there's been a lot of organizing done to many of those properties the larger buildings have a lot of vacancies in them. And so, for example, in the public housing, there might be a whole building that's empty. There might be 20 units empty. So we would organize to get the developer to agree to rehouse families on site rather than off site. And they didn't like that because that costs more money. It takes more time. We had to get the city involved to say who's going to help pay for this. But that's just one example of trying to do more on-site relocation, because as soon as you move someone to another neighborhood, you lose them, and a lot of them. And so that was one principle. But there are real situations, because you're getting properties like single room occupancy housing, which can be in really bad condition, and so you can't like say, here, move into this really bad unit for 3 years or something. You've got to figure it out. So we have come up against the reality of that, and of trying to help families find temporary housing, and there are relocation rules around that. But you know, we haven't figured that out, the whole answer yet. But it's overall, the principle is we should be able to do development in this neighborhood without displacing the families who have fought so hard to revitalize it in the first place, and that drives a lot of the strategy.
You mentioned that the Columbia Crossing was a private purchase, and I'm just wondering if you can just talk about that, because clearly you've gained the reputation to get private partnerships.
So that happened because John Barros, who was the young 17-year-old in the video, was deputy mayor at the time, and he called us and said, there's a real estate investment trust trying to buy the Citizens Bank in Upham's Corner, and you guys should buy it. And we're like, yeah, that's right, we should. That's a great idea. And how's that going to happen? And 2 days later, we were in a meeting with the city's housing chief and asking for $1 million acquisition fund loan out of their acquisition opportunity program, because allies in the city had been like, hey, there's this program and there's money in it. It hasn't been used for this before, but why not? Anything, you know, anything is possible. That's the theme. And so we were able to move more quickly than the real estate investment trust and lock up that property. Whereas there are a lot of other cases, especially during the foreclosure crisis, where there were auctions right outside our headquarters where we couldn't compete because we didn't have access to a line of credit or funding. And now, based on the Citizens Bank example, we've gotten the city to put a dedicated line of acquisition funds for community land trusts, and connected with National Cooperative Bank and others to have acquisition funds ready because otherwise we just can't compete. And the owners are like, yeah, we'd love to work with you, but we need our money tomorrow. And so that's been a challenge. So that's how we were able to get that one under control.
Hi, I'm really curious about the financing piece and like innovative financing tools that you're currently using or thinking about using. You mentioned the acquisition fund. So how did that, could you provide more details? How did that come about? And is that like a blended finance model? Like, yeah, what is that? And how did it get created? And what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, no, great question. And, you know, when we're working with land trusts now, most of the land trusts in the Boston area are way past the CLT 101 workshop phase, and they're like, yeah, we know that. Where's the money coming from? Like, where are we, you know, how do we make this work? And is there some special pool of money? And we're like, well, no, mostly no. But so the acquisition fund came from the city of Boston. It came from COVID relief funds. That's where the city had some extra money lying around. And unlike some cities that just use those funds to plug budget gaps, and like the mayor of Boston, I give her credit, used it to really expand access to affordable housing and programs. So they agreed to put a $2 million fund in the control of the Greater Boston CLT network. So it wasn't doled out by the city. They actually gave the funds directly, and that's been the seed money for the land trust to work with community development finance institutions and larger, you know, mission-based lenders to create acquisition funds. Also to so it's blended funds. It's acquisition. You can also use it for the development projects. They are loans, so you have to repay them back in and it's not enough money to, you know, it sounds like a lot of money and it's nothing, right? So it's like, the key is how do you leverage those funds to get access to some of these larger entities that would not only do loans, but lines of credit and other things that would help with the acquisition.
I think that wraps up our questions. Sorry about that.
I'm here all day. I got no other workshops planned.
Welcome to come up and.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I'm around the rest of the day, and I'm happy to. Really excited to be here, and really psyched to see the spirit of the Land Trust Network and the conference. And so I wish you all the best of luck, and happy to help however I can. Good luck.